So we've seen in these 4 Sundays leading up to Great Lent that each one has its own theme. And today we actually have 3 different themes on this, the Sunday before Lent. Today is called Cheese Fair Sunday. It's the final Sunday for eating dairy products before Lent. Today is also called Forgiveness Sunday. It is the time for us to begin the Lenten season by making peace with those who have grieved us and those whom we have grieved. But also the liturgical theme of the day, particularly if you were here at Vespers last night, you would have heard this. The liturgical theme for the day is Adam and Eve being cast out of paradise. The Bible is a story of exile and return, told over and over again, at different altitudes, if you will. At ground level, we have the story of the prodigal son who wastes his father's inheritance and then is received back joyfully by his father back home. At 30,000 feet, at maximum altitude, we have the entire story of humanity losing paradise and God providing for us a way back. And that way is with a capital W. Jesus is the way. So in the broadest sense, if somebody says to you, in one sentence, explain to me what the Bible is about. The Bible is the story of us getting lost out on the fringes and God bringing us back in again, God bringing us back home. That's what the Bible is about. Now, at 10,000 feet, we have the story of Israel. We have the story of God's promise to Abraham of the slavery in Egypt, and then the liberation and entering into the promised land. But of course, the story of Israel doesn't end there in the Bible, because then we have this ongoing cycle of Israel being faithful to God and receiving the Lord's blessings and everything going well, and then beginning to drift away from God and losing those blessings and things going poorly. Ultimately, things get so bad that the Israelites end up in captivity again, this time in Babylon. Now, eventually, Israel would get back into their land, but again they would be occupied, this time by Rome. And God would offer them one more time, a third time deliverance, but this time it would be different. Rather than offering them political deliverance, and just to the Jewish people, through the Jews, God offered the whole world deliverance from the tyranny of sin and shame and death through his Son, Jesus Christ. And so during Great Lent, we reflect on Israel's story and Israel's journey as a way of learning about our own journey to God's kingdom. And one of the things that we reflect on in this time, at this time of the year, is Psalm 137, which is a sorrowful song of the Hebrew people after they've been taken into Babylon. So the psalm begins, "By the waters of Babylon, there we sat down and wept when we remembered Zion. On the willows there we hung up our harps, for there our captors required of us sacred songs, and those who led us away hymns, saying, 'Sing us one of the songs of Zion.' How shall we sing the Lord's song in a foreign land?" One of the major themes in the Psalms is the theme of shame. The psalmist bemoans how his enemies put him to shame, and he asks God to put them to shame in return. All this talk about shame, which plays very big later on in the scriptures and in the Gospels, but that'll be for another sermon. But in this psalm, we have an example of this. You see, the Babylonians want the Jews to sing one of their sacred songs. Well, the most sacred song that the Jews could sing was the song that told the story of how God delivered them from Egypt and brought them into their own land. And that's actually a psalm. In fact, it's easy to find because it's the psalm right before this one. We're looking at Psalm 137, or in the Septuagint 136. The psalm right before it is the story of Israel's liberation and entrance into the promised land. But you see what's happening here. The Babylonians take the Jews out of their land, back into captivity, and say, hey, why don't you sing us that song about God leading you out of captivity and giving you your land? Remember that song? How does that go? You see, they're mocking the Jews. They're making fun of them as they're back in captivity. Father Lawrence Farley is a noted Orthodox priest from Canada who's done a lot of writing on the Scriptures. He has a whole series on the New Testament, and this is what Father Lawrence writes about these verses of Psalm 137. He says, "It was the crowning humiliation, the final blasphemy, to think of the holy hymns once sung in the sacred temple courts to the praise of Yahweh, now being used as secular entertainment, reduced to a kind of pagan drinking song. How could one sing the Lord's song like this in a foreign land, forgetting and debasing all that one once knew as holy?" The psalm goes on in verses 5 and 6. "If I forget you, O Jerusalem, let my right hand be forgotten. Let my tongue cleave to my throat if I do not remember you, if I do not set Jerusalem above my highest joy." These verses point to a very important, but also a very bitter truth. The longer that we live in exile, the more that feels like home. And the easier it becomes to forget about our true home. And so the psalmist is saying that it would be far better for me to lose all of my strength, all of my honor, my voice, to lose my place in the community. That would be better for me than to forget my true homeland in Jerusalem. Now, the Holy Fathers teach us that in the Psalms, Babylon symbolizes the fallen world. And one of the things that we do during Great Lent is we hear this warning: don't get too comfortable in this life, because this is not home. In his epistle, St. Peter calls the Christians pilgrims, people just passing through. And the English word parish, right, St. Nicholas parish, comes from a Greek word that means a temporary home. In today's gospel, Jesus says that where our heart is, where our treasure is, that's where our heart is. And so we need to set our hearts on heaven and the things above. Because by settling for, or even worse, settling into this broken world, we are robbing ourselves of the great inheritance God has for us. A place in His kingdom, a room in His mansions, where the glory never fades or goes out of fashion. Here's Father Lawrence Farley again. Is the world today so very different? Christians and their faith are openly mocked in the public square, and icons are sold as objects of art. The pressure is constant for Christians to acquiesce and support the secular status quo. But our hearts, he says, do not forget where we came from or where we truly belong. Babylon is not our home. Here we are but strangers and sojourners, exiles upon the earth. That's 1 Peter 2:11. Our true home is Jerusalem. Let us take courage. The exile will not last forever. Jesus is coming. Soon enough, we will all go home.